I'm Vanessa Stoikov and welcome to our three-part series on the future of small business in Australia. Today I'm joined by Andrew Conway, who's the CEO of IPA, the Institute of Public Accountants. Andrew and the Institute have long believed that the success of Australia is highly dependent on the success of our small business sector. And he's here to talk about why innovation and entrepreneurialism are to be celebrated. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm interested to know, you're obviously a lover of numbers, being the CEO of the IPA, but talk to me about why you picked what you do and why you love it.
Well, it's easy for me to say that I've got a passion for accounting. That's a strange statement. I don't think many people will say they've got a passion for accounting. But you think about the world without accountants, and a lot of people think that'd be fantastic. But really, nothing happens in a progressive or developed market without accountants involved at some stage. And I don't think it's too far a stretch to say that accountants do make people's lives better. They make people more secure from their financial point of view. And I think we've got to change the conversation at accounting beyond the facts and figures and raw numbers and talk about the people impact, the human impact of the profession.
And what do you think the most important impact is?
We use the language of the trusted advisor, but broader than that, the trusted productivity advisor. It leverages off this notion of trust. You know, Australian accountants are the most trusted accountants in the world. 9 times out of 10, a small business will go to an accountant in Australia for advice before anyone else. And that's quite a sacred relationship. You know, it's a very, very sacred thing for a person to trust another person with their livelihood. Small business goes to an accountant. They've got their mortgage on the line. They've got their personal livelihood and their family's livelihood on the line. They're trusting the advice provided by that accountant to help secure that livelihood. And so we take that trust relationship very seriously.
Talk to me about why you picked this job, because I know you were in politics. I mean, you were one of the youngest CEOs appointed to a public entity. You obviously were on a trajectory. What made you choose this course?
So I started my career as an accountant, but also as a teacher. So I taught for a short time out of university while I was finishing my commerce degree. Then I went and worked in insolvency.
Good lesson.
So insolvency is interesting. I mean, insolvency sometimes gets a bad rap, referred to as the corporate undertakers. It's a terrible term.
The Grim Reapers of business.
That's right, but it does serve a legitimate public interest because, if a business owes another business money, well, why should the business who's owed the money cop that loss? And so I think it does serve a public purpose. It's a question of how it's then done, I think, is the issue for the insolvency provision. It gave me an insight as to how, not just how business shouldn't be run from those businesses that went under, but importantly, the consequence when you look at personal bankruptcies that would be administered as well, that there's personal skin in the game, and that it gave me an insight both in terms of the way business should be run, but also about ethical conduct. And so there are a number of examples where ethics is so important in insolvency. The way you go through the insolvency process is a very personal thing. You're talking about people's businesses and their lives, but also personal bankruptcy. So it gave me the lessons around that business isn't about the numbers, it is about the people that drive the businesses. So segueing from the insolvency background into public policy, I had an opportunity to move to work here in Canberra, where we actually had discussions broadly about policy reform on corporate law. And got to work with the minister who was responsible at the time for the corporate law economic reform program. So seeing the way policy worked. And it just, if you like, fanned the flames within me about the role of public policy and good advocates. So from there into the IPA, or as it was then, the National Institute. And it was an interesting move because at the time I was getting married, so there's a whole lot of life change going on. And then coming to a new role, stepping away from something that I thought I'd be doing forever, and saying, actually, there's a bigger world out there and perhaps a bigger impact I could have. Given my passion for the profession, passion for public policy, it was a perfect fit.
And do your parents run a business? Are they accountants? What sort of background did you come from?
Well, Dad's an accountant. and he worked in commerce. So he was a CFO of a number of companies in Melbourne, so both Australian companies but also multinational companies as well. So I suppose from growing up, seeing the role the profession played, it was interesting. Our upbringing was really was a great upbringing. So we had so I've got three brothers, and was interesting in the sense that Dad would never bring work home, and I think for me, understanding the balance of being able to switch off or tone down, I think, because we can never really switch off in this day and age with our level of connectivity, but being able just to tone down and say, actually, home is home and work is work. So I can't recall ever seeing Dad working at home for his in his CFO role, and I think that's just an interesting analogy to where I see, or how I see, the work-life family balance as well. Mum was stay-at-home, but she trained and qualified as a hairdresser and worked for a brief time before we all came along. And 4 boys kept Mum busy at the home front. And
I have 3 boys. I understand her pain.
Yeah, so I think the food bills were nice and tidy too. So we kept the local grocer in business, I think. So we did very well. But so yeah, from a background point of view, certainly Dad, from an accounting profession perspective, got to see the role that he played and what he was doing, and I suppose that helped me understand the role of the profession, the prospects of the profession, and helped me lead down that path.
Okay, well, I've been intrigued because you've really shown a passion and an advocacy for small business in general, and I think it's long overdue. Australia needs a small business champion. Talk to me about what you think needs to happen. I know the IPA is going to release a white paper. There's some pillars in there that you talk about, that unless the Australian economy and government and the way we look at small business changes, then Australia might be in for a few shocks in the future, particularly when so much of our future has been caught up in mining.
Look, I think that the first thing we need to do in relation to small business in Australia and policy and advocacy is move away from the motherhood statements. I think everyone's tired of small business being the engine room or the backbone of the economy. We get that. I think government says that they get that. The challenge is, well, how do you unleash the power of small business? So from our point of view, we've said, let's resource a new conversation for small business in Australia. Let's take the discussion to a new level, and let's bring in the regulators, the policy makers, the candlestick makers, but the legislators as well. But bringing together everyone around the one table to say, what do we need to do to drive the growth of small business? And we facilitated that discussion over the last 12 months, really, in formulating the Australian Small Business White Paper. It's the first time ever in our country's history that an industry group has actually developed a white paper for small business. So governments will talk about it. They seldom deliver in relation to small business policy reform. We're seeing a significant change unfolding in the economy now about small business coming to the forefront, which is fantastic. But that's the start. It's an indication that government understands the power of small business, and our view is that we can resource the conversation. We can bring a new dimension to say that the role that an accountant plays, and understanding the power of small business from a client point of view, bringing that input together with the policymakers, the regulators and others involved and other stakeholders in small business to have a mature, robust but evidence-based conversation on small business is where we need to go.
Okay, so your definition of small business from a budget perspective was 2 million or less in turnover. Is that your definition?
Yeah, so I think it's very hard for us to quantify, for Australia to have a standard definition of small business. A lot of people say we should have one definition. Well, we should, but there are a number of reasons why that just doesn't work. You can be a very small business in a sense, or a micro business. You could be a sole practitioner, but you could be a day trader making tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue.
So that'd be nice.
Do you really meet the qualification of being a small business? So we think the revenue test is important. And of course, the government's recently announced the tax concessions and tax deductions for small business, which really are pegged at that $2 million turnover. And I think what will happen as a result is that the $2 million revenue threshold will become the default standard definition of small business. And we think that's good from a policy point of view, just to have consistency.
Okay, so let's talk about real small business owners. I am one of those who've run a business for 16 years, and there's a number of issues that you're raising, which I tend to agree with. Let's talk a bit about the banks and access to capital, because everyone knows people put their houses on the line, your mortgage is on the line. Can you ever see a day where banks will truly support risk-taking from small business? Because it seems, the more we go on, the less... It's actually easier to access millions from banks than it is $500,000.
Yeah.
Is that ever going to change?
Look, we're seeing a shift. I think we are seeing a shift from the banks, but it needs to go
Or is it
further.
just their advertising that we're seeing a shift?
Yeah, well, there's a bit of that as well. But I think banks are lending to small businesses. And when we did a roadshow around the country recently, we spoke to more than 550 small businesses from around regional Australia. One of the stellar or standout comments we had from a small business owner was, the best thing to ever happen to my small business was being knocked back for finance. And what it actually forced that small business to do was go back and critically assess the business plan. So I think it's very easy for us to get stuck into the banks, and to all intents and purposes, that's right to do, because they are making a lot of profit and they're very successful. We want the banks to be successful, but I think beyond that, where can we or how can we change the conversation with the banks to get them to think about risk-adjusted lending? So when there's a genuine discussion about what real risk does this small business pose to the bank? If a small business wants 50 grand to fund its growth, and which is a lot of money for a small business, why can't the bank give it a go? Is there a way of the bank changing its criteria?
But aren't there countries in the world that do have government-backed systems for banks to sort of mitigate their risk?
Absolutely. And one of the things we've proposed in the white paper is a government-backed loan guarantee scheme. In fact, Australia is one of the only markets in the developed world that doesn't have
That's what I would have thought.
a government-backed loan scheme. And I think there's a real opportunity for the government to step in. Yes, they provide the guarantee when it comes to the government security. They said we'll secure deposits. That's one thing. But how can the government actually step in and back the loans that are offered to small business? And we think that's a real pillar from the access to finance perspective that will unlock the potential of small business. It means that a small business can go to a bank and say, this is what I want to do. Yeah, it's like walking into an episode of one of those Dragon's Den style discussions like in the UK or other shows that run a similar format. We're walking and pitching your idea. It would be great to have a more open and robust discussion with the bank saying, here's my idea, I've got a passion, and allowing the bank manager to sit back and say, I can see the glint in the eye and the fire in the belly, let's give it a go. And I think if we get to a stage where a bank says, you're willing to put your personal livelihood and security on the line, the bank's going to back you. So we've suggested the risk-adjusted lending process can be reviewed, but also the state-backed or the government-backed loan guarantee scheme could be a great way to progress.
And I think there'd be a lot of supporters out there of that, because at the end of the day, is it truly fair that a business owner has to risk their home to employ people who can go and get a mortgage because they're employed by the person risking their home?
Or even worse, small business reaches into the pocket and pulls out the personal credit card. Now that happens time and time again. You're paying 17, 18% interest on that credit card finance. That's just a nonsense for a small business to have to cop.
That would be 80% of small businesses.
Absolutely, and we hear it time and time again. We have discussions with the cafe owners, the hairdresser, whoever it is, and they say, "Oh, it's okay. If I really feel the pinch, I'll just have to dip into my credit card." That's just not right in terms of what we need to do for the potential of small business. And we just say, no, the government will. But if you're going to put yourself on the line, your business and your family on the line, the government should get out of the way, encourage through government-backed loan guarantee schemes to give the lending profile of the bank a bit more latitude, and for the bank to say, right, we'll back you and we'll support you. We've seen over the last 12, 15 years, Australia's productivity growing by around 2.2%. For us to enjoy that level of prosperity going forward, we actually need to have productivity up over 2.5%.
But what do you mean by that? Because the last thing a small business owner wants to hear is that they have to work more. Because as you know, most small business owners work pretty much night and day. You never switch off. So, what does that productivity mean to you? What do people have to do to increase the productivity?
So it's about, in our view, it's about as it's been delivered. It's about releasing cash back into the business to invest, to make the business smarter and faster and more efficient. So it might be its use of technology. It might be a small shop, a $2 shop implementing a new FPOS system. That they could go and buy and pay to put. It might be a new point of sale solution for a hairdresser or a cafe or whatever it might be. So it's not working more hours. No, it's about working. Perhaps it's about working less hours and actually doing more with the hours you have. And so you've got...
Because I read somewhere Australians work more than most. You know, Western cultures.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's advocating we should be working any harder. I mean, there's pockets of the economy that could be perhaps working harder, but in our case, we're looking at how do we encourage startups? How do we encourage new tech? How do we encourage, the next... Why can't the next big Apple explosion take place here in Australia? So how do we create the policy settings to encourage that? So it's not just about the front end of the business, of the small business, it's the back end as well. What systems and software are they using? Why, you got tradies now turning up to do jobs at people's homes. They turn up, they put a fence. I had it in our own case. We had a fencing contractor to come and do just a back fence, pretty simple, straightforward job. He took a photo of the job. He said, "Are you happy with it?" I said, "Yes." He hit send. I get in my email inbox the invoice straight away, as well as a text message saying click here to pay the tradie straight away. So that's some
You're
really...
going to have tradies everywhere going, what was that system?
Yeah, well, that's right. But that's linked to accounting software, and it's just making things smarter, and it's just taking the burden away. The tradie then doesn't have to go home and do the paperwork.
But who can teach small businesses about what's out there and available? Like,
Well, that's
obviously
where-
the accountant is qualified, but do they go out there and talk about software and systems? And
Well, we're in our own organisation encouraging our members to step away from more of the compliance-based work they'd be doing. So you'd normally go to your accountant, your
For your
tax
tax
agent for your
return.
tax. And so there's increased automation into the tax system coming in, which is actually enabling our members to have a broader conversation with clients. So we said to our members, those extra hours you're now getting because you're running your practices more efficiently, go and spend with the small business clients and say, what can we do to boost your capacity to do things faster and smarter and possibly at a lower cost? So it's that broader conversation with the small business. And I think that's where we can see small business going down that path of becoming more productive, but it's not necessarily about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about women and the opportunity, I guess, for Australia to harness this incredible workforce that's being underutilised, mainly because most women have to look after the children because childcare is so expensive and it doesn't make sense to pay, to work for mostly to pay the childcare fees. And I've got lots of friends in that situation. I mean, the term mumpreneur drives me insane. I think it's quite demeaning. I've run my business since I was 26. What can we do to help get women back into the workforce and not have to neglect and leave the children?
I think the first thing is just remove the barriers. One of the barriers, as you say, is the capacity to find childcare places, have support in childcare, and the government's made a number of policy changes there, which I think are broadly welcomed by women wanting to get back into the workforce. And the question is, well, why on earth shouldn't they? I mean, there's absolutely no reason to restrict the opportunity for anyone, regardless of their gender. Women have an immense role to play in getting back into the workforce if that's what they want to do. There are a few opportunities around paid parental leave, which I think we'd still like to see progressed at some point in Australia, and the government's explained that it's a costly policy. But I think you've got to remove any barrier to any person wanting to participate when it comes to opportunities in small business, particularly. And the vast number of startups and successful small businesses will be driven by women returning to the
or
workforce.
even out of the home.
Absolutely.
But then you read the intergenerational report and you realise the population is dwindling, so there has to be some birth rates going up.
That's right. Yeah. It's not, and that's the problem in many ways, is people sometimes look at these issues and look at them through sort of one lens.
Yep.
When they're multidimensional, and it's very easy to get stuck into governments and oppositions and everyone else who say, we should be doing more. Well, of course we should. But
what are the
how
ideas?
And where and how do we fund it? And it's like the discussion on red tape. People say we want to cut red tape.
Yay.
Fantastic. Another motherhood statement. Where do we cut red tape and how, and what's the specific example? So I think from our point of view, with the white paper, in engaging with small business around the country, is encouraging the sense of training and skills development as well. So which again will provide opportunities for all Australians, whether that's women or men, or getting into the workforce and getting to start small business. Interestingly, you walk up and down your local strip shopping centre, and 1 in every 6 small business owners in that strip shopping centre will identify as having a significant skill shortage. and they're saying themselves, putting their hand up saying, we don't have the skills we need to run a small business.
Yeah.
So
What's your view on these private training colleges then? I mean, I know businesses that have gone from 5 to 150 in a year because of these government grants on, funding people's education. Do you think it's working?
Well, I think the crackdown is welcomed. I think in terms of the government said, look, we want to impose higher standards on the private education institutions, and they should, because there is a lot of government funding going through those institutions, and they should be providing a very important public interest element.
Can you ever see a time when the funding would go to the small business to train people as opposed to the individual?
Yeah, it's that's happening now in tertiary institutions and vet institutions where the funding is actually being, if you like, pinned to the student, and the student shopping around for the best course. So it has created an open market in many ways in vocational education, and I think that's a pretty good thing. I mean, it's put the institutions under pressure, but it's also helped refine and modernise courses, and so that it has developed the system in that way. Could they go to small business? Well, there's no reason why they couldn't.
Because, I know I train staff. I train them better than a course will train them,
But
and then they go and earn more money elsewhere.
Well,
so
it's a question of, you should be entitled to incentives. Whether it's a tax incentive in terms of providing that training support to your employees to help develop them.
Okay. What I'm loving about the white paper is it actually has ideas put forward and how it could work, which is, I think, what we need on the agenda. Talk to me about moving Australian businesses overseas. One thing I hear time and time again from people is there's not enough scale here, we need to go overseas. And we tend to be losing our talent. How do we help people export their talent?
Well, I think in the white paper we've mentioned the free trade agreements. And there's a lot in terms of free trade that but governments have done over the last decade or so to boost the networks where Australian business can go down. And where the idea, I think, of a free trade is effectively putting a chock in the door of an overseas market. So it's not guaranteeing you success overseas, but enabling you to go into a market and say, look, we've got an FTA, what can we do to actually explore this market? So we think there's an opportunity, looking particularly within the Asian region, for us to build those networks for small business and understanding the potential of whether it's sourcing components for a product or service, or the ideal really of selling Australian technology, new tech to markets particularly into China, Vietnam and other parts of Southeast Asia. So we think there are a number of ways the government could look at exploring R&D, tax concessions in that way, so to support the further development of new technology as a key mechanism for us to push those innovative new technologies across into new markets.
And is there a plan on how that could happen and how people could find out about that? Because that sounds good.
Yeah, so we've partnered with, obviously with Deakin University to help research and develop the research model around those new tech areas, but importantly the trade mechanisms and some of the tax concessions we've also put in the white paper, whether it's significant tax concession to a small business who wants to back themselves with development of new technology, or looking at the leverage to further develop export markets as well. So we've put those in the white paper, so they'll go to government. And I think it's hard to see the downside of that because government gives a tax concession to ultimately boost the growth of a small business. I mean, it's win-win.
Win, yep. Okay, final question. What's the biggest thing you've learned about working in small business, with small business, looking at insolvent small businesses? What's your one big business lesson that you can share?
I think the key thing in relation to small business is it's about people. And whether it's you running a business or working in a business, fundamentally the role that you play supports a person's livelihood and their wealth. So whether those people work for you or you're providing a service to clients or customers, you are having a direct impact on people's lives. And I think too often we get so stuck on the financial elements of a business. So, the key lesson that I've learned is being able to step back from the business and say, are we making a difference? Are we having a positive impact on the community within which we live and operate? And if we're not, what do we need to do about that? Which is precisely why we've taken such a strong and bold policy push in relation to small business.
Andrew Conway, you're a man of ideas, and I have a feeling Australia's going to be hearing a lot more from you in the future. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thank you.